Hey guys, welcome back to the Reading Stack. I'm Hunter, and today I've got a wonderful book to share with you. It is the book The Guns at Last Light by Rick Atkinson. It is volume 3 in his Liberation trilogy, and it is focused on the war in Western Europe from 1944 to 1945. So, The Guns at Last Light is 641 pages if you read through it, but then there's 200 and about 40 pages of index, notes, citations. So it's a pretty medium-sized book, really 641 pages. A great read. The book was published in 2013, and the book is really a narrative history. It's a story being told chronologically forward, but it's also very historical, as there's so many citations, there's so many sources he uses to weave the narrative, to tell the story, from soldiers, what they wrote in their journals, to the official army history, to what other biographers had gathered, and just different experts. Radio broadcasts, newspapers, a lot of sources are used in here to make this robust picture of the war effort and the story as it progresses through its highs and its low lows. So the book, it begins in England in 1944 when they're preparing to invade France, that's occupied by Nazi Germany, of course. And so this is before D-Day, and the beach landings at Utah, Omaha, Sword, Gold Beach, and Juneau, all those landings that were very costly and very important in defeating the Axis. And Rick Atkinson that wrote this, I didn't realize it when I got the book, but I'd actually read a book years back that he had wrote, and it was called The Long Gray Line. And it was kind of, I think I got it through like a yard sale or something, but it was a great read. So I was really surprised when I read this to find out it was the same person, because I love that book so much. The story it told of, I think it was the West Point class of 1966, and of course their experiences in Vietnam, just a brutal story there, but a really great read. So I'd recommend checking that out as well, by Rick Atkinson. And I haven't read his other two in this series, but I do plan to. Basically, the first one focuses on North Africa, the war, the phase of war there, and in the Italian campaign, just preceding this one, and it lasted, of course, up until the very last month of the war. So a long campaign there, long slog. Well, so the story, it begins in England with all the planners and the soldiers preparing for the invasion from 1943 really to 1944. And on page 12, it really gives you a picture of what it would be like to be the Supreme Allied Commander, as Dwight Eisenhower was, the future President of the United States. It says on page 12, shortly after 6 p.m., Eisenhower sped southwest through London in his chauffeured Cadillac, drawing deeply on a cigarette. In these fraught times, he often smoked 80 Camels a day, aggravating the throat and respiratory infections that plagued him all spring. He also suffered from high blood pressure, headaches, and ringing in one ear. Headaches and ringing in one ear. He had even begun placing hot compresses on his inflamed eyes. Ike looks worn and tired, his naval aide, Commander Harry C. Butcher, noted in mid-May. The strain is telling on him. He looks older now than at any time since I have been with him. The Supreme Commander was 53. So, a lot of times you think of a general living pretty posh and, not having to really bear through much behind a desk. But, of course, it really shows through the story how much stress he had to deal with. Just of all kinds, it even says he was away from his wife for 2.5 years, I believe, maybe close to 3. That's hard to imagine on a marriage, let alone all the cigarettes and high blood pressure and things he was dealing with. Out of so many of the people that are featured in this book, the commanders and the soldiers, just everyone's getting just ran ragged. Like there's heart attacks, there's ulcers, people die, people fall ill, people have to be relieved because they're so sick, either from stress or from their health issues. On page 69 we have this. It begins referring to what happened on Omaha Beach. So on page 69 it begins, officers ordered men in landing craft approaching the shore to keep their heads down, as one lieutenant explained, so they wouldn't see it and lose heart. They saw soon enough. On the right flank of the invasion zone, German gunners abruptly turned beach dog green into an abattoir. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Without firing a shot, Company A was reportedly inert and leaderless in 10 minutes. After half an hour, 2/3 of the company had been destroyed, including Sergeant Frank Draper Jr., killed when an anti-tank round tore away his left shoulder to expose a heart that beat until he bled to death. Among 22 men from tiny Bedford, Virginia, who would die in Normandy, Draper didn't get to kill anybody, his sister later lamented. A surviving officer reported that his men fell like hay dropping before the scythe. German machine guns with a sound 1 GI compared to a Venetian blind being lifted up rapidly perforated the beach, killing the wounded and re-killing the dead. All 32 soldiers in one boat, LCA 1015, were slaughtered, including their captain. A lieutenant shot in the brain continued to direct his troops until, a survivor recounted, he sat down and held his head in the palm of his hand before falling over dead. Wounded men jabbed themselves with morphine or shrieked for medics, one of whom used safety pins to close a gaping leg wound. A guy in front of me got it through the throat. Another guy in front of me got it through the heart. I run on, a survivor later recalled. An unhinged soldier sat in the sand, weeping softly and tossing stones into the water. This, an officer declared, is a debacle. So that's very much, akin to what you see in the movie Saving Private Ryan, but just even through film, you can't capture the amount of chaos of people being killed so rapidly, so viciously. In some of those positions on the beach, it really shows it was about the worst situation you could run into, but it just shows the perseverance, the tenacity of the American soldier, that still they were able to improvise, to adapt and overcome. Either tanks were going down in the channel, they weren't on the beach. They didn't have adequate naval fire support or aerial support. It was just a real mess, a debacle, as that officer said. And boy, the way that all these battles are just shown through what the eyewitnesses are seeing and through the after-action report, I guess you could say, it is just crazy. It feels very cinematic, like you're right in there, and boy, it's some pretty scary and scarring stuff to think about men literally running dead before they even know they're dead. The heart and the brain keeps working, but they've already gone. It's just really gives you respect for what those people went through in the past, and not enough people know or reflect on that the fate of the world was in the balance, and these men sacrificed everything, their lives. It just really is worth our reverence, our attention, and paying mind to those heroes in the past that died brutally to win and maintain our freedoms. Now on page 258, a little different note, this guy was a total boss. In The Guns at Last Light, it goes through all the armed forces, not just the American focus, but the British, the Canadian, the Polish, the French, as well as like the political delegates behind it all. So on page 258, we've got a real British boss. I'd never heard of this guy before, but it reads, beginning, at 11 a.m., Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, in a high-necked woolly beneath his battle-dress blouse and an airborne smock, ambled down the center aisle, provoking another yelping chorus of salutations. Lanky and spare, Horrocks was said by one admirer to possess an ascetic, almost ecclesiastical face, and his thick nimbus of white hair added a patriarchal mien to a man barely 49. Mounting the stage, he surveyed the assemblage with a wry smile, then welcomed them with a quip that would be oft repeated in later years to illustrate his son Freud. "This is a tale you will tell your grandchildren, and mighty bored they'll be." Much knee-slapping ensued. Horrocks was made for such moments. He had been born in an Indian hill station, the son of a knighted army surgeon, and as a young officer was severely wounded in the gut and captured at Ypres in 1914. Repatriated after 4 years in a German prison camp, he squandered his accumulated back pay in an epic 6-week spree. In 1919 he was captured again, this time by the Reds while fighting with a British contingent, aiding the Whites in the Russian Civil War. Again, he was repatriated, having managed to survive typhus in a Bolshevik jail. After 18 years as a captain and a turn in the 1924 Olympics as the British pentathlon champion, he quickly ascended the ranks when war resumed, although he deemed himself a not very bright Philistine who had been lucky. Evacuated from Dunkirk, he later fought with Montgomery at Alamein and across Africa. While preparing to command the British Corps at Salerno, he was struck down by a German fighter during a strafing run on Bizerta. One bullet caught him in the leg and another punctured his lungs and intestines before exiting through his spine. Half a dozen brutal surgeries kept him hospitalized for more than a year, and Medicos declared he would never have another field command. Instead, Montgomery summoned him in August to take 30 Corps. The botched capture of the Scheldt adjacent to Antwerp was in part Horrocks' fault, as he candidly confessed, and if he now radiated vigorous good humor, some of those hunched in their cinema seats thought he appeared a tad frail. Eyes alight, graceful hands gliding up and down, he spoke for an hour to review for a final time the plan called Market Garden. The Allied objective was to dominate the country to the north as far as to the Zuider See, a shallow lake off the North Sea, better known as the Ijsselmeer, thereby cutting off communications between Germany and the Low Countries. So just listen to that guy's life story before all this. This guy was probably one of the hardest commanders you could imagine. I mean, this dude really lived it. Twice a POW, British pentathlon champion, born in India. Man, that guy just had a real life story, and so much of that is true of the lives that are featured in the story that played a significant role in the Second World War and the Western Front. They were just larger than life people, and man, it's just really interesting to look at their life and not come away a little bit inspired, a little bit just like, man, like these people were really living through such dark, through really tough times. It made them very strong men. On page 641, the last page, it's by the year 2036, U.S. government demographers estimated fewer than 400 veterans would remain alive, less than half the strength of an infantry battalion. So it just shows the numbers of World War II veterans is, shrinking rapidly each year. There's still, just a few left, you could say, a few tens of thousands maybe. But just such important history there. We call them the greatest generation, and it's just amazing what they accomplished in their youth, and we're still living with the what they won for us. Basically, we have a lot of respect and gratitude we owe them, and to know and to not forget that history, I think, is the biggest thing. Not to forget their sacrifices. So, does this book belong on your bookshelf? I'd say yes. If you want a history book that is very revealing, I really enjoy studying, this time period, but there was so much in there I'd never heard before, more than a lot of other books I've read. It's not super crazy deep, like a book that's just on D-Day or one campaign, but these were the series of campaigns in Western Europe. And it's not dry. The author has done a great job of taking those sources that, that may be dry to sift through, but making it a real compelling, enjoyable, flowing story that just, the narrative is just woven very well. Filled with very shocking facts, like I had talked about all the illnesses a little bit of the Allied commanders. That was pretty shocking. And then what was going on in some of these battles, like the Germans had even invented mines they were laying down that couldn't be detected with their mine detectors. That's some pretty shocking stuff, seeing how the soldiers were dealing with that. I couldn't imagine if you didn't know, if you had no way to tell that there was traps in your way that would blow your legs and groin off, Very shocking. But then there's also very funny facts. There's a lot of good jokes. These soldiers, they made jokes about everything, and it's pretty good in the book showing that. There's a lot of inconvenient facts. I think a lot of like our historical perspective now, we have this kind of mental narrative that's pretty easy, where it wasn't these inconvenient facts, where we really blundered some stuff foolishly, and it really cost us. And so it's really good in the book of showing that, Patton, he wanted to rescue his son-in-law from a POW camp, and so he sent, in the book it seems very half-baked, this raiding force to go in and save his son-in-law, and Patton kind of abuses his authority to launch that. Just about everybody gets killed and captured in that raiding party, and very few people escaped, and they had to be liberated later. So that was very inconvenient, and Eisenhower a lot of times was very aloof, as the story shows. It really frustrated soldiers and people, his fellow officers, because he was didn't really have, I guess you could say, that command voice. He wasn't very insistent, but he was better at being a conciliator and making friends and preserving those political alliances between the armies of different countries. And also, I think you should get this book because it's just a great study of leadership, looking at all these people, even on the German side, the American side, the British side. You learn a lot about good and terrible leadership in this book. So it'd have value for anybody thinking about that. Leading with integrity and focus. And reasons why you wouldn't like this book, if you're just not interested in the time period, if World War II, it's not your thing, then you wouldn't like this, I would imagine. And also, you may, if you haven't read a lot in this time, you may need that airplane view, because this book mentions very little of the rest of the war, what was going on, because the focus is on the Western Front. It's not really focused too much on the Russians in the Eastern Front or the rest of the American forces, the Marines, Navy, Army in the Pacific fighting Japan. It's really focused in here on Western Europe, which is a virtue for the book. But if you need to know more about the time before you get into it, you may need a more broad overview book, and this would be a little bit more closer to earth, a little bit more closer to the situations studying it. If gore and violence are something you want to read about, it chronicles what the Allied armies found in the concentration camps, as well as what napalm, mines, flamethrowers, anti-tank rounds, stuff like that, what it would do to human bodies. If you don't want to read all the gory details, because it's pretty dark stuff from a really dark conflict. A lot of people see the Western Front as more kind of a glorified, cleaner war, and in some respects that may have been. A lot of people think more of the Eastern Front as more of the grimmer, genocidal struggle, but it's not as clean and sanitized, the Western Front, as maybe some people think. As you may hear in grade school. Lessons. What lessons can this book give us? I think the biggest overall is in leadership. I think one big lesson is don't be aloof in leadership. Don't be disconnected from the situation. You know, if stuff's happening and going on, if you're 300 miles away and you're asleep, then you're going to be your enemy, adversary, or just the situation is going to have the advantage over you because you're not present, you're not mentally checked in. And so don't be aloof, because if you get aloof, you know, if you don't know what's happening, then tragedy is on the way and just a total breakdown in the mission. And don't abuse your authority. When I mentioned that about Patton, that was one thing, and you do see officers undermining each other in the story, and that undermines the mission. You know, if you're abusing your authority, do this because I told you to. You know, it not to have that trust or that credibility preserved. It makes it really hard to command, to lead. You know, people would get very cynical about your vision or your mission, your values, just cynical about you as a whole. So don't abuse your authority as a boss, manager, leader. Trust is vital. Another thing is know when to compromise and when not to compromise. You see some people that were leaders would never want to make compromises. You know, some of the French leaders, some of the British leaders, some of the Americans, and there was just always this struggle going on that was just wearing people out, creating breakdowns. So you got to know when to compromise, and Eisenhower was really great at that, as the history shows. But also, he wasn't that good in a way about that standing up for himself. You know, more on the nicer side, and it was really good in a lot of ways, the political ways, but it was also frustrating for the Americans with what America wanted to do, you know, and he was more on that global picture and trying to appease everybody, and it worked great in a whole lot of ways, but it was also very frustrating for British America. Everybody was getting frustrated because he wouldn't say this is final. But later in the story, though, he does get more, I think, assertive in a very good way. He gets exasperated by catering to all these different demands. And lastly is rest up. I think that's great for leadership. That's just great for human beings. So many of these soldiers were going without sleep, without eating properly, and there was just a breakdown of their health. You know, people died, people had to be relieved of command. That was a very shocking detail, is how many Allied commanders had to be relieved because of just combat fatigue, PTSD, depression, health issues. Just everybody was really struggling with their health, and so I'd say it's important to rest up, to take care of yourself before you're put out of commission by illness, psychological crises. So, well, guys, I want to thank you so much for watching today, and I do hope you will check out this book, The Guns at Last Lot. It was an awesome read. I've really enjoyed it. Learned a lot of stuff I never thought about, and I would say it is definitely worth your time to read this wonderful book. Thank you, guys. We'll have more content soon. I'll see y'all later. Bye.